Hey guys, today we're going to take a look at Chapter 6, The Road to Revolution from 1754 to 1775. The dates on this are very specific. We're looking at the beginning of the French and Indian War all the way up to the beginning of the Revolution with the battles at Lexington and Concord. Oh. So here you see the before the French and Indian War territory. Notice the small area that the British colonies occupy all the way to the right. All that green has been claimed by France. And then obviously the orange is what is claimed by Spain. So remember, Americans are doubling every 25 years. Their population is doubling every 25 years. And since most Americans at this point are farmers, they need more land. They need more access to land. So in the late 1740s, early 1750s, the Ohio River Valley becomes this territory coveted by the American colonists. The French have also already claimed this territory as part of their New France colony. So obviously, there's going to be a clash on the horizon. The French built a fort at Fort Duquesne, what we call modern day Pittsburgh, to kind of reiterate their claim on this territory. But in 1754, 21-year-old George Washington, one of these wealthy Virginians, leads a campaign into the Ohio River Valley to survey it, stake claims on this area, etc. His small band of soldiers comes into contact with a group of French soldiers right outside of Fort Duquesne. Shots were fired. The French retreated back to the fort to get reinforcements. Washington created almost this makeshift fort necessity for the altercation to come. Eventually, the French come back with reinforcements, and George Washington is forced to march back home. But this marks the beginning of what we call the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War, guys, is going to be the war happening here in America when, on a larger scale, this war is happening globally. The global war between Great Britain and France is the 7 Years' War. So the French and Indian War is here in America as just a small part of the global 7 Years' War. Also note about this, the French and Indian War, we see on both sides the French plus their Indian allies, the Huron, versus the British, the Americans, and their Indian allies, the Iroquois. That's why it's called the French and Indian War. They're fighting the French and their Indian allies, the Huron. As this war is on the horizon, the British also deported the Acadians up in Nova Scotia down to Louisiana. This is showing that they're kicking out these French in this territory that they have just claimed. Modern-day Acadians, or the descendants of the Acadians, are now Cajuns down in Louisiana. Just a little fun fact. So the war is here. This 7 Years' War on a global scale, the French and Indian War more specifically here in America. And in 1754, to almost get ready for this war, a Congress is organized up in Albany, up in upstate New York. The goal here is to get the colonies to come together, to unify, because we're about to fight this war against the French and the Huron. The problem, though, is only 7 of the 13 colonies actually sent delegates to the Albany Congress. So this is showing that there isn't actually a lot of unity yet. The other side goal of the Albany Congress was to maintain the Iroquois alliance. The Iroquois nation is up in upstate New York, so using gifts and money and things like that to keep them loyal to the American/British cause. Ben Franklin, one of the key organizers of this Albany Congress, actually also wanted to promote colonial home rule, to give America a little bit more control over ourselves here at home. Not leaving the British Empire, but to give us a little bit more control here at home. The British completely laughed this off. They said, absolutely not, you're our colony, and that's the way it's going to stay. Also at Albany, Ben Franklin created this very famous political cartoon, the Join or Die cartoon, showing, obviously, that unless we come together, like this snake that's been severed into several pieces, we're going to die. So this was originally created for the French and Indian War. It'll be resurrected, in 20 years or so for the American Revolution as well. Same message, just a different enemy at that point. So let's talk about this French and Indian War. The British general Braddock is brought over, and originally his goal was to capture Fort Duquesne, what we call modern day Pittsburgh. Braddock, though, is not used to a war campaign in the wilderness, right? Pittsburgh at this point, or Fort Duquesne, I'm sorry, is a wilderness territory, right? And he's clomping through the forest with, thousands of redcoats in their bright red uniforms, Americans untrained with all their supplies, etc. They're not used to a guerrilla style warfare, a hit and run style warfare. That's exactly what the Huron and the French are capable of doing, attacking and then retreating and hiding. And Braddock's forces are completely decimated outside of Fort Duquesne. Braddock was killed. The Huron extended their warpath all the way down to North Carolina, killing indiscriminately both American soldiers and also civilians as well. This is, terrorism, to strike fear in the hearts of the people. So back in Great Britain, the Prime Minister at this time is William Pitt. Following the death of General Braddock, William Pitt took on more of a hands-on approach to this war effort, right? I mean, he's not leaving Great Britain, but he's going to take on more of a hands-on approach to this war effort. And, based on that map you saw at the very beginning of this slideshow, the French have claimed tons and tons and tons of territory. It's very sparsely populated. You can't conquer all of New France, this giant landmass, right? So William Pitt really orders his armies in the field to focus their attention on Quebec and on Montreal, also to focus on the French West Indies down in the Caribbean. And that's exactly what the British and American troops do. They successfully captured Quebec in 1759 and Montreal in 1760. And I'm skipping a lot here, but really, the war comes to an end very, very quickly, right? Not just the French and Indian War, but the 7 Years' War as well. And at the Treaty of Paris, which is the treaty to end the 7 Years' War, a lot of things change hand. First and foremost, Great Britain becomes the dominant world power. They are the superpower. France has lost. France has wiped off the map of North America. The British have succeeded, and they have kicked the French out of North America. Spain, who was allied with Great Britain in the 7 Years' War, that global war, received access to the Mississippi River and Louisiana. That's not going to be forever because Napoleon is on his way back to controlling it. And Great Britain claimed control of the northern portion of Florida. But really, the big news here is that Great Britain is the number one superpower. Unequivocal, the French have left North America. Here you see a painting of the British claiming control of Quebec. Here you see some of the major battles in that French and Indian War. Okay, so some major results of this French and Indian War. With this victory, Americans, people living in America, they gain a lot of military experience. They gain a lot of confidence in themselves. Remember, this is going to be the training ground for the American Revolution in 20 years, right? So all of our war experience, all of our officers, think George Washington as an example, gains their experience by fighting in the French and Indian War. The other result of this French and Indian War is that, Americans at this point really considered themselves British citizens. They are just part of the British Empire living somewhere else. But it became abundantly clear during the war that the British didn't look at them the same way, almost looking down their noses at the Americans, right? Like that we're their redheaded stepchild, right? That we're not on par with the British troops, right? So it really showed this divide between the British and the Americans, right? That we're not just British people living in America. We are something uniquely different. And even the British are acknowledging that. Also, a big problem is that American shippers continued to trade with the French down in the French West Indies. That smuggling continued even during the French and Indian War, trading with our enemy. That's going to create a lot of animosity among the British, that the Americans, merchants, are still continuing to trade with the British. And even though only 7 of the 13 colonies showed up to Albany, this is a step towards fixing that colonial disunity. Remember, American colonies were founded 13 different colonies formed by different people at different times for different reasons. It's not a guarantee that they're going to come together for the coming American Revolution, right? This is a step in that direction, a baby step, but still a step nonetheless. So also with the end of the French and Indian War, the removal of the French really creates this, a puffed up sense of independence among the Americans, right? That they're now in charge of North America, and they're really going to create some new Indian policies for these Native American tribes. Before this, Native American tribes would often play the the British off of the French and vice versa to get a better trade deal or whatever it was. There is no other European power left, so it's either deal with the American/British or, deal with nobody. So they really feel like they are now in charge of everything. Little do they know, there's going to be some hiccups in that little plan of being the masters of North America. So Americans start pouring west into that Ohio River Valley now that the French are gone. And in 1763, Ottawa Chief Pontiac launches a rebellion, an attack on these Americans moving into the Ohio River Valley, right? Killing all these many American colonists moving into this area. 2,000 are killed in the Ohio River Valley by Chief Pontiac's forces. They're trying to stop the Americans from moving west into their territory. So this really, puts a hiccup in this plan, that this western expansion isn't going to be as easy as the American and the British had originally thought. The British have suffered a major debt from the French and Indian War and the 7 Years' War. And so to allow the Americans to move west is going to mean a lot more permanent troops are going to have to be stationed out there to protect the Americans moving west. That's going to cost money that the British just don't have right now because they've paid so much money for the 7 Years' War and the French and Indian War. So instead, the British respond by issuing the Proclamation of 1763, or the Proclamation Line, drawing a line down the border saying Americans aren't allowed to move west of this territory because they just can't protect them out in the Western Territory. The Americans are extremely angry by this decree, by this proclamation, and angrily disregard it and continue moving west anyway, in open defiance of this British order. So here you see the before 1754, before that French and Indian War, and then notice what changes after. So the British claim all of this territory, but notice that proclamation line. It is literally exactly where the Americans were allowed to sit before, right? Telling them they're not allowed to move out to this Ohio River Valley because they can't be protected. What did we even fight this war for, many Americans are wondering. They angrily disregard and continue moving west. Okay, so all of this really is a precursor to the American Revolution, right? So remember, all these immigrants who have poured into America over the years, they automatically had an independent spirit. You almost need that independent spirit to leave your entire life behind back in Europe and move to a completely different different continent, right? So their descendants, many historians regard, continue to have that independent spirit. There is a rise of republicanism back in Europe. During the Enlightenment, these ideas are starting to flow about the role the government should play, the role of power that they should have, etc. And one of these ideas coming out of the Enlightenment is this idea that maybe a good kind of government is a republic, little r republic. I'm not talking the Republican Party here. A republic, another word for representative democracy. Maybe it's time to move away from monarchy and allow the people to hold the power and elect people to make decisions for them. Those ideas are also starting to circulate not only in Europe during the Enlightenment, but also over here in America, because ideas are crossing the Atlantic Ocean, right? Those transatlantic exchanges. Also, over in Europe and specifically in England, there is a new political party growing in power, the Radical Whigs. This is a group of anti monarchy, anti aristocracy. They are challenging the power of the king, right? Those ideas, also often, using these Enlightenment ideas, are also starting to filter across the Atlantic as well and influence the Americans living over here. The other major problem comes with the economic policy of mercantilism. Remember, mercantilism is the economic policy of colonies. The purpose of the colony is to create wealth for the mother country. Raw materials are drawn out of the colonies, are shipped over to the mother country, in this case, Great Britain. They're turned into finished products and then shipped back to the colonies to sell. We provide those guaranteed markets to buy finished products, those British goods, right? We're not allowed to buy stuff from other countries, right? Those navigation laws are in effect to ensure that all the money is flowing to the mother country. That is their purpose. But on the other side, the mother country is also supposed to provide protection for the colonies. So it is a two-way street, but as time goes on, and America gets bigger and bigger and bigger, this is going to lead to a lot of problems. It's going to lead to currency shortages here in the American colonies because finished products automatically cost more than the raw materials. So if the Americans are buying these finished products from Great Britain, all of their coinage is flowing over to England, right? Meaning we don't have currency here in America to buy stuff from our neighbors, to buy, a dozen eggs from the neighbor up the street or whatever. But the British government doesn't care about that. They're like, well, that's not our problem. Our focus is on making money for the British merchants and our country over here. We also don't want to hear anything about bankruptcy laws because if Americans want to declare bankruptcy, it means they're not going to pay their debts off to those British merchants. There is no wiggle room, according to the British government, when it comes to these things. And Parliament also always retained veto power over all colonial legislation, which isn't that big of a deal. But as America gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're growing up, for lack of a better term, they really feel stifled by these mercantilist policies, that they don't have the ability to expand beyond what they've always been. So there are some pros and cons to mercantilism. For a really long time, the navigation laws were very loosely enacted, right? They're on the books, but nobody's really paying attention, right? That period of salutary neglect where, people are, the British government is kind of turning a blind eye to the smuggling that's going on. That's not going to last for very much longer. Those navigation laws are about to come back in full force. But for a really long time, smuggling was just no big deal. It also meant less competition for the colonies. The American colonies held the monopoly on tobacco for the British Empire, right? We didn't have to compete with other countries growing tobacco. We were the producer of tobacco for all the British Empire. For over 100 years, we've had the strongest army and navy protecting us with zero cost to us for now. But like I said, it's still considered a stifling arrangement that we will always remain dependent on the British government. I'm going to stop there. I'll continue on in part 2 here in a minute, and I'll see you guys later. Bye, guys.